If God be for us, who can be against us? But if God be against us, as God was against Absalom, who can be for us? And since God is eternal and unchangeable, we know that He is always our light and our salvation. No matter the circumstances, God remains the light and salvation of those who trust in Him. God was light and salvation to David as he sat in his comfortable palace as the king of Israel. But God was equally light and salvation to David as he was thrust out of his comfortable life and had to flee before Absalom. Circumstances may have changed, but God did not change, because God eternally loves His people. He always shines upon them in favor. He never shows Himself to be darkness to them. He never forsakes them or ceases to shine upon them, because He is the covenant God, the God who declares Himself to be the friend of His people. No one can approach God, because God dwells in unapproachable light. But God reveals Himself to those who are His own through the name Lord or Jehovah. And David enjoys a perfect friendship with this Jehovah God. God made Himself the friend of David. God chose David in eternity. God forgave all of the sins of David through the blood of His own Son. God keeps His friendship with David, and nothing depends upon David. And therefore David calls out upon the name of Jehovah. This is, after all, the name of the God he has known from childhood. When he was a little boy, sitting upon his mother's knee, he learned the name Jehovah. He was circumcised in this name on the 8th day. And we see all kinds of examples throughout his life where he shows he believes in and trusts and has confidence in this Jehovah God. And now, as an older man, in the midst of his trials, he still trusts in Jehovah. The children know, if you take the name Jehovah and add the name salvation, you get the name Jesus. And ultimately then, Jehovah is Jesus Christ. And through Jesus Christ alone, God reveals Himself to be light and salvation. It was no accident when Jesus came upon this earth and said, "I am the light of the world." The Jews would have understood, the Lord is my light and my salvation. He is claiming to be Jehovah God. Jehovah is the only true light. And here comes Jesus Christ saying, "I am the light of the world." And Hebrews 1 verse 3 tells us that Jesus is the brightness of the glory of God. We reflect that brightness in a creaturely way, but He is the brightness of the glory of God. And He came into this world as the true light, exposing darkness and telling people about the light who is Jehovah, preaching righteousness and doing good, all for the glory of God. And in the Psalms, David is a type of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is the true David, and Jehovah only shines upon the true David, His Son, Jesus Christ. And only those then who are in Jesus Christ can experience God as light and salvation. Outside of Jesus Christ, we can only experience God as darkness and destruction. The holy God who consumes sinners in His wrath. But in Jesus Christ, we experience the favor and love of God. And the amazing thing of the gospel is this, beloved. God stopped shining upon Jesus Christ, so that he would eternally shine in his love upon us. Jesus always knew his Father to be his light and his salvation. He always knew the favour and the love of God. And yet there came a day, at the end of his life, when he was hanging upon the cross, and darkness descended upon him on Calvary, and he cried out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" Because he then knew God as darkness and destruction to him, because of the sins which were imputed to Jesus Christ, the sins of all of his elect. He experienced for the first time the terrible darkness of God. God treated his Son as a miserable and wretched sinner, guilty of all of the sins of his people, and he poured out his wrath upon him. And now he has earned for us the light of God's fatherly countenance. So God now shines upon us with all of the blessings of salvation. That's the truth of our text. God is light to us. God is salvation to us in Jesus Christ. And what is our response? What is the result of this knowledge? The response is we respond to trials without fear, with a spiritual courage. Whom shall I fear? Says the text. Of whom shall I be afraid? Fear is the response of unbelief to unpleasant or unexpected circumstances. What does an unbeliever do when he experiences something unpleasant in his life, for which he has made no preparation, and before which he stands powerless? He is afraid. When he hears that terrible diagnosis from the doctor, he has a disease for which there is no cure. He is afraid. And as he faces death in his own strength, without the light and salvation of Jehovah, he is terrified. And he will be terrified as he enters death and enters the eternal darkness of hell. And we too, we have the tendency to be afraid. When we hear such bad news and something terrible happens in our lives, our first response as sinners and as weak Christians is to fear, because we can't see the light and salvation. All we can see is darkness. We have to wrestle with our feelings of fear, and then when faith triumphs, we can respond in triumph with our text. The Lord is my light and my salvation. It's all dark around me, but the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? Of whom shall I be afraid? That was the response of David to his trial. He did not fear. He expresses confidence. He looks past his weakness. He looks past the terrible circumstances of his life, and he looks upward and he sees Jehovah God by the eyes of faith, and he says, Jehovah is my light and my salvation. Nothing can separate me from his love. No arrow can pierce me except God will it and decree it, and nothing is outside of his control, and I always experience his favour and his goodness. And therefore he praises God. I will sing, yea, I will sing praises unto the Lord. And he knows that he will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living.